so much. So my name is Monica Trinidad. I'm going to be one of the presenters today. I am currently in Chicago. I'm working with the People's Response Team, which is the group that put these trainings together. And then I'm also with For the People Artists Collective, which is a grassroots radical organization of Black artists and artists of color in Chicago. And we create artwork for the movement in our communities that sort of puts out visualization for resistance and survival and struggle. And so that's a little bit of what I do. And I want to introduce you to Debbie Southhorn and let her tell you a little bit about herself.
Cool. So my name is Debbie Southhorn. I work here at AFSC in Chicago full time, and then also get to do some work with the People's Response Team and some other groups as well. But mainly I'm just excited to be here tonight and share these resources that we've developed over the last few months, and think about more ways we can sort of collectively build our capacity to resist sort of interpersonal and state violence in this really moment of a lot of escalation. So thanks, Monica.
Cool. Thanks, Debbie. So cool. So we've developed these resources with the People's Response Team, and I'll go into a little bit about who we are and what we do when I start the presentation. But yeah, we're offering these materials for free, and we want them to be used. We want them to be accessible, which is why you are all here. But of course, donations are always appreciated. We have a donation button link where you got the trainings, where you were able to download them. There should be a button there. So if you're coming from an org that can, spare some bucks, we would totally appreciate that so that we can continue doing the work that we're doing, can continue creating documents like this. And so we're super excited to share these materials out. And I'm glad that all of you were able to join us today. If folks can, I know a lot of folks are on the phone right now, but if folks have access to the chat box, it'd be cool to just see what town, city, state you're in, if you want to chat that out there so other folks can see where you're coming from. And perhaps if you're with a specific organization, maybe you can say what organization you're repping tonight, just so folks can sort of see who's in the room or who's on the phone right now. It'll be exciting to see friends from all over. Cool. So while you all are doing that, I'll keep talking. This overview is not going to be super in-depth. We don't have the time for that, right? And it would be really awkward to do that over a computer. So hopefully you have had a chance already to read and review the training outlines that we provided about a week ago. We're going to walk through each curriculum and explain how the activities go, important notes with each of them, so like how they play out within our trainings, just to sort of give you an idea of what it actually looks like. And as Khalid said earlier, feel free to use the Q&A box to write questions as we go along. I'm going to be going first, presenting the Copwatch training, and I'm just going to go right through it from beginning to end with no interruption. And so whoever is not presenting, in this case Debbie, she's going to review the questions and make sure that I answer them at the end of the section. So you might see that tab pop up now. It says Q&A. You ask a question there. And we really want to reserve that Q&A section for training outline specific questions. And we want to, after you sort of give a shout out to where you're calling from, we want to leave the conversation box to just be for like logistical questions if you can't hear, or even if we're talking too fast, or something like that. Cool. And we plan to wrap this up by about 8:30 p.m. Central Time. Hey, Mimi. So we plan to wrap this up about 8:30 p.m. Central Time sharp. So with that, we're going to jump in after. Oh, so I see there's folks from Surge. Houston Surge, Champaign, 2 folks from Champaign. Cool. More people are typing. All right. I am going to jump in now and go to I'm going to share my screen with you all. So folks that are on your computer, you can actually go along. Hey, LT, you can actually go along with the training outline page by page with me. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and do that. Great. I'll give it a second to open up on some people's computers. I know it might be a little choppy and slow. All right. So we're going to get started with sort of the who we are piece. Hopefully everybody can see the presentation now. All right, well, I'm just going to sort of jump in, especially for folks that are on the phone. I should just jump in right now. So who we are the People's Response Team. We're originally a working group of We Charge Genocide, which was a grassroots intergenerational organization effort that started in 2014. And we took a group of folks to the UN to write a report on police violence in Chicago against youth of color. And so we sort of came out of that movement, and the People's Response Team was inspired by the Anti-Police Terror Project's First Responders Team in Oakland, California. And that First Responders Team committed to supporting families impacted by various forms of police brutality. And they came to Chicago actually to train us as a group in the work that they're doing, and just sort of figuring out how can we adapt the work that's happening in California, right? Since California in the Bay Area is very different from Chicago. So we were curious in how we can adapt that work to fit Chicago's landscape and challenging police violence. And so it is important to say that this work is not new, right? This work is happening all the time. Communities are actively responding to police shootings in Chicago on a daily basis. And so our goal was really just to build an infrastructure of resources to offer to families and loved ones once mainstream media turns its light onto another story, right? We don't collaborate with or talk with law enforcement, and we work in partnership with Justice for Families, which is a working group of Black Lives Matter Chicago. A lot of us are involved in groups like Assata's Daughters, the Chicago Community Bond Fund, the National Lawyers Guild Chicago, For the People Artists Collective, and Organized Communities Against Deportations. And so that's just a little bit about who we are as the People's Response Team. So when we're not rapidly responding to fatal police shootings in Chicago, we're also creating materials like this so that we can prep our communities to operate, in ways that are alternatives to calling the police, right? Or not having to not rely on police to intervene in situations of hate crimes or situations of harassment on the streets, right? And so that's sort of why we're here. I've been doing cop watching for about 10 years now. So I have a little bit of experience with it, not a whole lot, but definitely a lot of experience leading these trainings. So I'm just going to jump into the prepping for training, and I'm not going to, I'm not going to read like each piece, but we do everything in this training outline is very Chicago specific in some ways, right? And so what we did was we highlighted and italicized all the pieces that should be specific to your state or city or town laws and resources and things like that. And so we really just want to emphasize that there are pieces in this where you'll have to do your own research to make it the best training possible, to have the most information possible. We made a key for the training outline. So if there's a checkbox, it's items that you have to make sure you have or make sure you do it in the training. If it's like a blacked out box, that means that's a presentation paper or dry erase board item. Make sure you write it. And we know the presentation paper is super expensive, right? If you go to Office Depot or Office Max, that stuff is really expensive. So you could always ask if you're going to a university or an institution or even an organization, if they have those supplies already, then that would be useful to have on hand. Or a lot of places that I do these workshops utilize dry erase boards and chalkboards and things like that. So as long as you make sure that you have places to write things on in the room, that's going to be really important. And then we have a little star asterisk sort of thing for the key, and that's a facilitator tip item. So just make sure that you read that before you move into actually doing the training. And so the goal of the Copwatch training workshop is to one, quickly train the average person in basic cop watching laws. Two, methods and safety considerations when you're cop watching. And three, to actually promote cop watching as a method of bystander intervention, right? Cop watching doesn't have to just be about filming. We're actually trying to broaden that spectrum, that conversation around cop watching to be more about just like making your presence known to both the person that is being harassed and to the police, to make sure that they know that you're watching and that you're making sure that person that's being harassed is going to stay safe throughout the entire situation, right? And so through this workshop, we're going to be utilizing historical context, small, large group discussions, and role playing. And role playing is going to be probably the hardest piece of the training, probably the most difficult, right? Because, there's lots of giggling, there's lots of acting involved. You really got to play the part. And so that's pieces that we're actually still working on, is like, how do we actually do the role playing in an accurate way and in an effective and helpful way, right? So just putting that out there. The roles that are needed, they're all listed out here. It really takes a team of folks to do this Copwatch training, but just because there's so many aspects of what's happening, it's really, if I were going to say what one important piece is, or one important role, it would be to have an attorney or a legal aid there, because there's going to be some really hard questions, right? And you're not going to have the answer to all the hard questions, because you have this training outline and you're really just trying to show folks how to physically cop watch, right? So you're not going to know a lot of legal stuff possibly. And so it's really helpful to have somebody like we, for instance, have someone from the National Lawyers Guild present, or there's a group in Chicago called the First Defense Legal Aid that can be present. And so those are really useful people to have in the room. And it'll also be really helpful to have food and snacks. I think, in my personal opinion, I think it's really important to have food and snacks at your events, right? You got to feed the people. Again, materials, like I said earlier, sticky presentation paper. I think the brand is Post-it Self-Stick, or utilizing dry erase boards, chalkboards, things like that. Markers, pencils, pens. There's cop watching tips, handouts, and feedback forms, and all of that helpful stuff, which you'll find at the end of this outline and on our website. Cool. So in terms of room setup, we like to have the room set up sort of auditorium style. So we like to have the presenters at the front, because that's usually where there'll be a projector, or there'll be the chalkboard or dry erase boards. And then it really works with a minimum of 10 people and a maximum of 50. More than 50, and it can just get unwieldy with questions and too much movement, too much chatter. So we really recommend a maximum of 50 for people to really get a good experience out of it. We like to pre-prep the room with a lot of different presentation papers up. So we like to pre-prep the room with Know Your Rights stuff. And from our experience, we've realized that sometimes our Copwatch trainings can get too focused on the Know Your Rights piece. And there are workshops out there that'll focus on Know Your Rights trainings, right? And so what we really want to emphasize is that's an important piece of the Copwatch training, but we really don't want that to eat up all of the time that we actually want for the Copwatching piece. And so we like to have that information on the wall, for people to reference and for us to reference throughout the training, but we really like to not dwell on those legal questions. And something that we came up with is, during the workshop, if someone has like a really complicated question, they can write it on a piece of paper without disturbing the sort of training flow. Maybe even like get a Post-it note, put it up on there. And then if you have that lawyer or attorney or whatever, or legal aid present, they can refer to that presentation paper during the training, so that it doesn't interrupt your training flow. And then at the end, you can all revisit all of those legal questions at the end. Cool. And so we really recommend 2 to 3 hours for this training. Oftentimes I get asked to do this training in like an hour, and that's really hard, right? Because you're trying to go over history of cop watching, you're trying to go over the quick Know Your Rights stuff, you're trying to go over cop watching experiences, safety considerations, filming the cops, role playing, like all of that is going to take up a lot of time. So you really, if people are like, can you do this in an hour? You could be like, yes, but you have to understand that it's gonna take out some really key crucial pieces, and it's not gonna really fully prep someone for actually cop watching. So I really recommend 2.5 hours as a really good time frame. That's because attendees are going to have lots of questions, they're going to have experiences that they want to share, and that stuff is really important to actually get the full experience and to fully understand the gravity of cop watching in our communities, right? I'm going to kind of go past the intro section, because, you do your intro, you say who you are, who you're repping, maybe ask attendees who they are. If there's more than 20 people, try to do a popcorn style, because you don't want more than 20 people to go around. If you have 20 people in the room and you have everyone introduce themselves, you're going to eat up about an hour of your workshop time. So I'm going to jump into the disclaimer and workshop goals. We really a lot of times people think that, oh, you guys are a Copwatch group, right? And we're like, no, we're not Copwatch, because Copwatch does exist, right? There's like We Cop Block and Copwatch and all these different Copwatch official centralized groups. But what the People's Response Team, we're decentralized in terms of Copwatching, and we just like to offer the tools to our community members on how to safely and legally Copwatch, right? So you definitely want to make sure if you're leading this training that you have your disclaimer at the beginning that you are not a Copwatch. And if you are, then say that you're a Copwatch, but definitely put that disclaimer out, or people might think that you're doing something else. Yeah, and so we really want to emphasize that watching cops has the potential to escalate a situation, right? And so sometimes we have to play a role that we wouldn't necessarily agree with when it comes to interacting with cops, right? We are invested in making sure that the person that's being harassed by police is staying safe. And so we're not gonna play the role of yelling at the cop. We're not gonna play the role of trying to agitate the cop, right? We have to play the role that's trying to keep everything as calm as possible to make that person as safe as possible. And also recognize that cop watching is part of a broader movement to end police violence. Cop watching alone does not end police violence, but it's just a piece of the larger puzzle. And also, people like to take photos in the room, right? Especially everywhere we're at, we like to document, we like to take photos. So make sure you come up with room agreements in the beginning on photography, videography, audio recording. Just make sure that you're really coming up with a clear plan for you can take photos of me as a facilitator and the board, but please don't take photos of the people attending. Or someone that's in the audience might raise their hand and be like, I don't want to be photographed. So then making sure everyone knows not to take a photo of that person. And then also write those room agreements somewhere visible so that latecomers can see that. All right, cool. So yeah, and then you'll see the workshop goals, cop watching goals, what the workshop is and what the workshop is not. Then you'll sort of jump into the history of cop watching. Now, I included resources at the end of this training that sort of goes more in depth to the history of the Black Panther Party. I mean, there's a lot of history around that, right? There's tons of history on how cop watching got started in Berkeley. And I would highly recommend, going over those articles before you leave the training. I just wanted to sort of put the most crucial bullet points into the training so that you can cover those, but you can go into any of these pieces of history as much as you want. Just definitely, refer to the resources. And then that'll also be a great time to talk about if there is a history of cop watch organizations in your city or town. And maybe you can sort of give them a shout out, name some of that work that's already been done in your community, and even ask attendees if they know any history too. Then we go into this Know Your Rights Spectrum activity. And this is something we just sort of came up with so that, you just did a lot of talking. You just did a lot of introduction work into this training. And so you really want people to get up, move around a little bit, so have their first interactions with the people that are in the room. So this activity that we created it's pretty typical of go to one side if you feel that the statement is true, or go to the other side if you feel that the statement is false. And so we created these prompts of statements, and then for instance, the first one says, it is illegal for police to lie to you. So that everyone's sort of oh, I don't know, what does it mean? And I don't know if that's true or not. So then they go to each side, and we're like, all right, now that you're in those groups, let's have you talk amongst yourself. Why do you think it's true? Or why do you think it's false? Or there's people that are going to be in the middle, and they're going to be like, I don't know, and they're going to talk too. And again, there's a facilitator tip right there. Make sure that there's enough space for folks in wheelchairs to move around. If you have all of your chairs sort of clumped into one, that's not going to really, it's going to make it a little difficult for wheelchairs. So just be conscious of that, of the space that you're creating for folks to move around. And so you can actually, if you do the research, you can replace these statements with ones that are even maybe specific to your city or specific to youth. Like we said in number 4, you can create your own around the legality of filming the police in your state, or legal requirements for students or young people to talk to a principal or a school officer. So we just put these in there and created them and did our own research and consulted with a legal person to make sure that this is accurate. But you can really get creative in this section, right? And then we show a really quick Know Your Rights video. It's the First Defense Legal Aid here in Chicago. They did a quick sort of BuzzFeed style video of Know Your Rights when stopped and frisked. And it's like 2 minutes long. And for those that aren't familiar, FDLA is specific to Chicago. They provide free 24-hour legal representation to people in Chicago police custody. And they educate Chicagoans about how to protect their rights. So that would be a great time to see if that sort of thing exists in your city. And if it does, then utilize their video or their Know Your Rights information that's relative to your city or town. So by this time, you're about probably like 20, 30 minutes in. So you're going to want to take like a 5-minute break, let people know there's food, drinks, let people know where the bathroom is, and have people come back in 5 minutes. And after that 5-minute break, everyone's going to sort of take their seat. And this is another activity for people to pair up and actually talk about their experiences with cop watching. What strategies did they use? What went well and what didn't go well? And we had at first utilized those first 2 questions, but then we're like, oh, well, what if people have never cop watched before? Then, we're like, well, what would be your first instinct in cop watching? Or if you chose not to cop watch in a situation, can you say a little bit why? And that's just because when people are paired up, they open up a little more, they talk a little bit more. You're gonna, from that conversation, you're gonna have a few people share out, what they talked about. And you're going to hear lots of really actually great tips for cop watching. That's going to be a perfect transition into your safety considerations for cop watching, right? So things that people are bringing out, you're going to like write them on the presentation paper as different tips for cop watching. And the aim here is just to share collective knowledge, right? Because like, I love this saying, it's no one knows everything, but together we know a lot, right? And we really want to break that barrier of like, we are the experts and you are the learners, right? It's like, no, we're all experts in our own way. And we want to share our information that we have, collectively. So we have safety considerations and it's just like a few risk factors that we came up with to think about when folks are cop watching, like thinking about, cop watching increases your chances of interacting with police, right? So you want to make sure that you're thinking about, what sort of things you have on you or what's your current identity or having different IDs, what that can mean if you actually do get arrested when cop watching. And cool. And I just got a time check. Oh, okay. So, and so that in that section, it's like you're going to have discussions around what are some tips for cop watching if you happen to be alone. And you're going to have a lot of really great experiences and tips coming out of that. And one thing, I've noticed is I try to share an experience of cop watching alone. And one example that I've shared before is like if I'm on a train platform, trying to go to the other side of the train platform or trying to go like sometimes you can cross over to the other side of the train platform and watch. Just trying to come up with some ideas for how you've cop watched alone or getting people's experiences to share before the training can sort of help guide that conversation. So after you go over these safety considerations, you're going to go into filming the cops. And to me, I feel like this is one of the least important parts. But also the most important parts is because there's some things that people forget. People forget that if you're going to record, to don't hold your cell phone up like horizontally, but make sure you're like holding it vertically? No, opposite. This is vertical when your phone is upright, and you actually want to be recording horizontal so that you get the whole piece. Landscape, yeah. So portrait versus landscape. And then another important piece of this is also to recommend, or not even recommend, but to emphasize that don't record the people that are being harassed, but to record the police, right? Because you don't want to accidentally capture something the person might be doing or not even might be doing, but that the police could use, even if you brush up against a police officer, that can be assault, right? So you don't want to accidentally capture anything that might put that person in danger if you're trying to keep them safe. Cops cannot charge you with filming, but they can arrest you on something else if they decide that they want to arrest you. And there's a link I put in there because we have had a comrade here in Chicago who was, filming the police on a train when cops were harassing a woman, and they arrested him. and, charged him with like interfering with the police officer or, some other arbitrary thing. And, it got dropped, and they always usually typically eventually do, right? But that's something that's just to keep in mind. And that's why it's so important to not skip over those safety consideration pieces. We have the filming specifics, which are pretty self-explanatory. I'm going to skip over that in the interest of time, but definitely feel free to ask questions in the Q&A piece, so we can go over that. Some of the best things I think in this training are sometimes people just are like, well, what do I say? What do I say to a police officer if they're telling me that I can't cop watch or that I can't be there because it's illegal? And so we've come up from experience with these statements that are really helpful when you're talking with a police officer. So one of these statements is, or one of these situations is, if you are being told you are interfering with an investigation, which is what I've been told before, you can say, I'm just making sure no one's rights are being violated. Because you're sort of using, or you can say like, I am a safe distance away, you're now violating my rights. Because when you sort of use their language that they use, it can really have an effect on how they respond to you. Because if you're there, and you're cop watching and you're being like, I can be here if I want, like that's probably what my response would be. But that might escalate the situation, right? That might actually not make it safer for that person you're trying to keep safe. So again, using that language that's like, I'm just trying to make sure no one's rights are being violated. Or saying, I'm watching from a reasonable distance. Because it is our, constitutional right to watch and film police, right? So you say you're violating my rights. Or another piece you can say is, I'm exercising my right to record and document police activity. So you can even, I would love to I should actually do this and write them on a little note card and keep them in my wallet. Cause when you're in that moment and you sort of freeze up, you could just whip that out and look at it and be like, oh yeah, these are the things I need to say. The bystander intervention piece is new for me actually in doing these cop watching trainings, and I'm really appreciative of Debbie and other folks in People's Response Team for making sure that this got in there, because I think it's really important, like I said earlier, to not think of cop watching so much as filming the cops, equating those two together. It could just be having your presence there, being present in that situation, and figuring out creative ways to cop watch that don't necessarily involve a camera or that don't necessarily follow the protocol that we're going over, right? So something like an example of the situation that I like to talk about is, say a police officer is saying you can't be here, you're interfering, you're going to get arrested if you're interfering. Well, you can actually have a conversation with the person next to you if you're with a friend, right? Because like I said earlier, we don't recommend cop watching alone. Actually, I don't even know if I said that, but that's in the training outline. But yes, we don't recommend cop watching alone. We always recommend having a buddy, just like we recommend having a buddy when you go to a protest or a rally or traveling. Always have a buddy. But you can turn to your buddy and be like, hey, Ashley, did you know you don't have to consent to a search? And then Ashley can be like, I did not know that, Monica. Did you know that you can call this number and they can give you a free attorney while you're in custody? And so having that conversation really loudly with the person next to you could be really cool because you're actually not interfering anymore. You're just talking really loudly with a friend, right? And that's a really creative way to do a bystander intervention that's paired with cop watching, right? Another thing you could do is pretend to be on the phone. You could ask the person being harassed if there's someone you can call for them, right? There's so many different ways you can engage in cop watching and making sure that person stays safe without actually having to pull out your phone and film, or without actually having to, have a whole team of 6 people cop watching. Yeah, and then the last really big piece of your training is going to be role plays. And that's where you put all of the collective knowledge that you created throughout this training to the test. So in most of the scenarios, you're going to need 2 people to play the cops, which is always the really awkward part, right? So we like to recommend that the trainers actually be the cops. You need 2 cop watchers and then a person that's being harassed in the situation. I really like to make sure that the 2 cops check in with the person that's playing the person being harassed, just asking if it's okay to have physical contact, asking is it okay if I yell a little bit at you, or is that going to be too triggering? Just making sure that person stays safe in this role play is really important. So we included 2 scenarios, and again, you can come up with any scenarios you want, but these are the ones that we've had experience with and that we've utilized within our trainings and have turned out to be pretty helpful. I have about 2 minutes before we're going to jump into a Q&A session for this specific training outline. And so at the end of your training, you really want to just make sure you refer back to any legal questions that came up. So if a lawyer is present, have them quickly answer any of the lingering questions. If a lawyer is not present, you want to really take the time to let your attendees know that you're going to follow up in an email soon with all of those answers. You definitely want to give feedback. So we create some feedback forms that are just like, what was your favorite part of the training? What was your least favorite part of the training? What could we improve on in the future? And so that you definitely want to make sure you have those. And remind attendees that we just went over a ton of information. So it totally makes sense if they're feeling overwhelmed or if they don't feel ready to Copwatch yet. And encourage everyone in that room to pair up with someone from that workshop. And it could even be somebody that they partnered up with in one of the activities, and to commit to like meeting up for coffee and reviewing what they learned together, because you never know what could come out of that. And also that this isn't just about, going out and being cop watchers, but it's also about building community together, right? It's an aspect of that. And so we really want people to do that. At the end of this training, there's resources on different links that go more in depth into the history of the Black Panther Party, some resources on alternatives to calling the police, and then some current day links to resources or articles covering what Copwatch groups are doing right now and how they're, being monitored by police in specific cities. And then we have our contact info. So we really would appreciate some feedback, right? So if you did this whole training and you're like, this piece feels really awkward, definitely let us know. And if we're missing anything, definitely let us know as well. So that is my whole training piece, and I cannot believe I just did that in 40 minutes. And so now I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to look at the Q&A section and see if I have any questions there to answer.
This is also a good time to start writing some questions because it's been pretty quiet there.
And then if there aren't any questions, then, I'll give this like maybe a 5-minute window. And if there aren't any questions, then we'll just let Debbie go right into the presentation for the bystander intervention.
Hello?
Hello, is that the one with the question?
Hi, yeah, I have a question and I'm over the phone.
Yeah, do you mind just introducing yourself briefly?
Sure. My name is Alan. I work for an organization called Compañeros Inmigrantes de las Montañas en Acción in Asheville, North Carolina. And I'm just having a question. I'm just wondering a little bit about if you have any recommendations or tips on when coming into contact with ICE, either during a raid or during a checkpoint, and if there's like tips at a checkpoint or during a raid that you should, that we should think about.
Yeah, that's a good question. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So we're working really closely with folks in organized communities against deportations here in Chicago to figure out what that can actually look like. I know that they're developing a Migra-Watch sort of training outline curriculum. So we're really waiting on that to sort of figure out what we can include in this Copwatch training from that, what feels accessible to folks that are just, Copwatching 101 sort of area. And so I think from the experiences that I've had with training with OCAD, it's a lot of the same cop watching tips apply to watching ICE. It's legal to film ICE officers. It's legal to watch them. You can, if they're being detained, I'm not sure if they can actually call FDLA or the number that we have here in Chicago if they're being detained. Oh, I see Debbie's typing something.
I'm just writing what you're saying.
Oh, she's writing what I'm saying. Okay. I thought she was answering. But yeah, so we're really still trying to figure out how we can include that information in our Copwatch training, and definitely, in conversation with those folks. And it's definitely something we can forward along to you, after, this training call or in the next week or two. And we're also working on getting this, training translated into Spanish, that can also be accessible on our website. Any other questions from folks on the phone or on the computer? I'll give it about 2 more minutes and then we'll move on. And if you're on the computer, Debbie just sort of chatted a summary of what I said.
I'm seeing a question in the chat box that asks if we've seen the cop scene in Get Out, the movie, and they say they feel it provides a great example of what white folks might do that is actually really dangerous for people of color in confrontations with police. Monica, do you feel like recapping that scene? I know you've seen the movie. I remember it. I'll try and recap.
Yeah, I don't
folks
remember
who haven't seen it. This contains a spoiler alert, so if you intend to see Get Out and haven't seen it yet, and don't want to hear about this one scene, I mean, it doesn't spoil the movie. It'll tell you about this one scene. Plug your ears for a second. But in the scene, the white girlfriend and the main character, who's a black man, are driving together. She's driving. Actually, the white one's driving. They get pulled over by police, and they ask for her ID and his ID, even though he was just in the car. And so she starts to respond to the cop to say, oh, he wasn't driving. He doesn't need to give you his ID. And then the cop responds with, but I asked for it. I want, his ID. And sort of what is his name? I don't remember names to save my life. But they basically end up trying to tell the girlfriend that it's okay. And she tries to sort of insist that he shouldn't have to show it, which I think is a little different than cop watching, right? Because we're not talking about a situation where a stranger or a passerby or someone else is being harassed by the police, but in this situation, the two of them are having this interaction with the police. But I think what this person's speaking to, right, is this idea that they're going to become an advocate. She became an advocate for him, right? Even though he was like, let's just get this over with. So yeah, it's interesting. Interactions with the police are super complicated. But I sort of appreciate the reflection on that movie, and I encourage everybody to see it and keep thinking about the implications it has for white folks. Do you want to handle one of these other questions, Monica?
Yeah, so I guess I'm seeing that some folks can't see the Q&A section, and so someone named Palika asked, do you have any examples of a time when there was a really tough or challenging situation that came up in a training? And I said, yes, definitely. I definitely think that there's lots of complex legal questions that come up in the trainings that I've had experience with that I'm like, I am not a lawyer. I have no idea if that is legal or not, which again is why I always emphasize having someone that has legal knowledge in the room. And the thing about cop watching is that every situation is different. There really isn't like one exact situation that you can create this perfect response to. Every situation is situational. Sometimes people are like, well, what if I'm talking to the cop and I'm saying all these things that you're saying to say, and then it still escalates? It's like, well, then maybe it actually might keep the person safe if you do step away. Don't leave the situation completely, but maybe just step away and watch from afar and make sure that person stays okay. But yeah, every situation is going to be different, and I think that is something to emphasize in the training that people aren't going to quite get, and it's still hard for me to even grasp of like, oh my God, there isn't an actual way to respond. It's always situational. And so I think it's important to have all of these tools and all of these collective knowledge pieces in our toolbox so that we can be prepared for like any situation that comes up. I see another question that came up in the conversation box that's any tips about cop watching if you have children with you? That actually, Debbie, I wonder if you have a answer to that, because Debbie works with the Chicago Child Care Collective and might have a better idea around that one.
Can you do the next question while I'm pulling up something?
Yeah. So the next one is from Kim, and she said, not sure if this fits in, but I was at a demonstration when the white person next to me started yelling at the police, and I didn't know how to call them in. I think Debbie's actually going to cover this in her bystander intervention. Like, is that right? You're definitely going to cover something like that, where it's like, okay, how can you intervene in that situation? What are some tips on how you can intervene with that person to sort of calm them down in that situation that might be endangering other people that are in the vicinity? So that'll definitely be covered in the bystander intervention piece. Debbie, did you find a question to the one with children yet? No? Any other questions while Debbie figures something out for that one? Oh, wait. Okay, I see.
My computer is going very slowly because it's very excited to be on a webinar. What I was going to pull up, and I'll share in the chat box in a moment, is a really cool resource that was put together by a bunch of different childcare collectives from all around the country, but kind of headed up by Regeneración in New York City. Was a resource on talking about police brutality with children. And there's a lot of different perspectives, and it's just a compilation of some really great resources. So I wanted to throw that in there in response to the question about tips for cop watching if you have children with you.
Do you know where folks can find that?
I'm going to put it in the chat box in a moment. You could also Google Intergalactic Conspiracy of Childcare Collectives, and it's on the Weebly that group has, or wiki page, one of those internet things. But I think the simple answer is that no, we haven't developed separate strategies yet. And I think people are going to have different perspectives on how to deal. I think it makes sense for... Can you turn your mic off?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yep. In a lot of communities, children are experiencing police violence, and so it's important for them from a young age to understand sort of what their rights are and how to stay safe when safest, right? You can't stay completely safe, but how to stay safest when interacting with the police, and a lot of people already have those conversations with their children. And then I think for cop watching, perhaps it means staying across the street instead of getting up closer. I don't think it's necessarily a barrier to doing it, period. I think it depends on the age of the children and sort of their, how sort of comfortable are they going to be standing near like blue lights. It changes according to the kid and their sort of previous experience, perhaps with violence or trauma from police. Or just sort of fear of blue lights because they've never had to deal with police. So I think that's a hard one to answer, but I don't think it's impossible. I think there's strategies. Again, in the training outline, we talk about how important it is to not cop watch alone. So if it's only you and your child, maybe you're going to be across the street and you're just going to try to make sure no one's getting really harmed. And if it's escalating, you're going to call a friend who lives nearby and say, can you come out here? We need some support. If you're with a group of people and you have a bunch of kids with you who seem a little skittish, maybe one or two parents or friends take the kids a couple blocks away and one or two people stay and sort of watch the situation, try to show support to the person being arrested or harassed until things are resolved. But I don't think there's a cut and dry answer, but I really appreciate the question, and I want to keep working on that for sure. Thanks. I also just saw a question, Monica, do you want to answer it, of has a situation ever come up where someone in the training suggested a tactic that you don't condone or recommend?
Yeah. So one of my good friends actually is like, man, if I was cop watching, I would just yell at them until they stopped harassing the other person and then harass me instead. And I was like, that's not a good idea for cop watching, because now you're putting yourself in a situation, and then you're creating a situation for both yourself and for other people. There's also been suggestions of like, oh, you can thank the cop and be really extra polite to them and tell them you appreciate what they're doing except for this situation. And then I would be like, you know what? You can, whatever you feel like you need to do in a situation to make that person feel safe, you do. I, however, would not do that because I don't want to thank them for harassing somebody, and this is what they do. So I would definitely be like, I would turn it around and just be like, if you feel like that's going to make that person stay safe, then try it. But if like you're saying, if it's a tactic that you don't condone or it's a situation where you think that's actually going to put the person in danger, just be like, I actually think that that's going to make the situation worse, then better. So I would definitely just be as blunt as possible, and also in this training, I think it's really important to be able to say I don't know. I think a lot of times people want to have all the answers in this training, and there are not a lot of answers in this training. There's a lot of tips and skill shares and experiences that will hopefully prepare you for cop watching, but there's not a lot of concrete answers sometimes. And it's okay to say, I don't know, I'll get back to you on that in a follow-up email, or something around that, or in that line. Debbie, do you have any? No? Okay, cool. And I think, we're running a little bit short on time, so I'm going to definitely pass this over to Debbie. But definitely feel free, if you're still thinking of cop watching questions, to definitely enter them into the Q&A chat box or the conversation box. And I will be monitoring those chat boxes while Debbie's going over the bystander intervention.
All right. I'm coming back. You get really into typing the answers to these questions. And LT, another participant, just had a great question that we'll try to come back to at the very end. But I do have thoughts about that. LT, thanks for the complicated question about how do we move beyond filming in terms of cop watching and intervening when police are harassing someone, especially in more extreme acts of violence. And I think that's a really good question, and makes me think about sort of the tactic of de-arrests, and then also how do you get more people to the scene. And I think one person with a camera is not as powerful as a whole community coming together around someone. But we're going to jump into the bystander intervention, and I'm going to do my best with the tech. Last time I was in full screen, my computer froze, and then I left the call for a moment, but none of you noticed because Monica was talking. So I am sharing my screen now. You should see the sort of front page of our bystander intervention training. And again, I encourage you to follow along with your own version of this if you have it. They can all be downloaded on the People's Response Team website. This training, the Copwatch training, like Monica hopefully explained, was actually started years ago with a group called We Charge Genocide, which we were both a part of, and it's something that we've refined and developed over the last several years. This bystander intervention training we actually just put together at the end of November. So one of the responses to sort of the election results and sort of seeing the sort of Trump administration being elected, and then also seeing sort of like a wave in racially and otherwise messed up, motivated forms of violence against people happen. Like interpersonal violence went on an uptick in the country. Lots of people like to call them hate crimes. I try to avoid using hate crime language because I think it leads straight to this idea that then we need hate crimes legislation, which I actually am not convinced makes us safer, right? There's a lot of documentation of how that's actually harmed communities that they're supposed to be helping. So we talk about it as bystander intervention. So we developed this and have done it probably a half a dozen times since. Everybody wants it right now, which I think is exciting, and it speaks to this moment that we're in of a lot of people sort of showing up to respond to this moment of what feels like escalated attacks on marginalized communities across the board, because in a lot of ways it is a very big escalation, right? White nationalists just took over the White House, and smaller self-organized white nationalist groups and formations are sort of coming into the limelight in ways that we don't want them to feel like they are able to do. So we developed this training, and I'm going to skip the who we are because I think Monica did a great job of that. And I'm going to just jump right into sort of why do we have the training? What are the goals of it? And how do we sort of get prepared for it? So like I just said, this is to respond to interpersonal violence. Again, it's trying to sort of hold space for people to build collective knowledge. Most of us on the planet have seen some kinds of interpersonal conflict and often some form of harassment, especially if we went through public education or take the train anywhere ever. It's something that we've often all witnessed situations and wish we could have responded differently, or we've intervened, and so we have experience in that way. Similar to Copwatch training, we recommend a couple of facilitators, social media team, all that, yada, yada. Always food and snacks, always. Got to feed the people. We really don't think this training as it's designed works well for more than 50 people. A minimum of about 10 because it's pretty interactive. I've seen a similar training done with more people, and you just have to do it more of a lecture style, and then take questions about individual scenarios for most of the time. But this is nice with a group of around 30 people, so you can really get into it. You can see sort of what it's for and what it isn't. Ground rules, questions, and strategies are all posters that we like to sort of have available. An alternative to sort of using sticky paper is sometimes newspaper. Print shops will let you get large paper from them really cheap. Thanks, LT, for pointing that out. And then we are going to just jump right in. So introductions, name, pronoun if people want to share that, organizational ties. And then I like to ask people what they're hoping to get out of it, because then once it's over, we can be like, look, you got everything out of it. Often it's like, build confidence or gain some new skills, which are exactly why we do the training. So it's really, though, important, we think, to do what the training's for and what it isn't. Because, again, people want all the answers. This doesn't give you that. Sometimes people really think like, wow, bystander intervention, this is how we respond to racism writ large. And it's like, actually, this is a very tiny piece of the puzzle. It's an important piece because it helps us build confidence and sort of look at things as a community and build more collective power. But again, it's not the end all be all. Again, we think it's important to go over the workshop goals. We had these P's we like: provide resources, practice what we preach, and commit to protect each other. I like to offer ground rules instead of just starting with a brainstorm, and then make sure people understand them and give space to add or change them. It just saves you a little bit of time. And then we go into the bystander intervention basics. I really recommend, before you try to facilitate this, that you read an article. We link it in the back by Jess Skolnick. I think it's called like a Web Companions something guide to bystander intervention. It links where it says on the next page, remember to breathe, the author of this article. And again, it's in the back in the resources section. But it's a really helpful online article, just a couple of pages long, that just sort of walks you through basically how we put together this whole part for the basics and sort of getting ready to intervene. We've really noticed that the main reasons people don't intervene are that they don't know what to do and they don't want to make it worse. And then the third is that they don't want to bring violence onto themselves. But we really try to focus on reducing harm in the moment. We do that by making our presence known. And then also, if it's verbal or someone just talking smack, the goal isn't to win an argument. It's to engage, right, and show other people around that there's actually, that this isn't okay and that there's an alternative sort of message than the one that they're trying to promote. And if we approach bystander intervention with those goals in mind, it really does help make it hard to make things worse, right? That we don't have to have the right answer to show someone support if they're experiencing harassment. How do you know if the situation needs intervention? Being alert, scan your environment. Notice your body. Our body tells us a lot. Did you just have a sinking pit feeling in your stomach? Did your heart just start racing? Like, these are sort of cues often that something is off. I think this is also a point where we have to be kind of cautious, right? Especially like white folks engaging in bystander intervention, like, or like adults or older folks engaging. Like, are we assuming that the way some friends interact is like violent, even if it's just like they're messing around? And so noticing, like, how do we tell when something has really reached a level that for you means you want to ask somebody if they need support? And then there's other times where it's just very clearly someone's about to get really messed up physically, and you want to try to de-escalate. So that's how. Remember to breathe. And then I really liked, so I went to a training led by the author of that article, and they said that they practice saying no in the mirror every single day to build confidence. I was like, well, that's cool. Let's do it in our training. And so we get everybody to sit upright in their chairs. I would have you do it like at your computer, even though no one will hear it, just because you'll feel a little goofy, right? So like square up your feet with your shoulders, wherever you're sitting. If there's someone else in the room, you can giggle now because they're not going to know what you're doing. Take a deep breath. And then we're not going to do it on the count of 3, because then it would all be at the same time, right? The goal is that you just leave some space for people to say no, and they're going to have to hear their own voice, and it's going to be great because then they'll build some confidence. And if we have trouble doing these things in exercises, it's also hard to think about ourselves as people who can intervene in moments where we're really escalated. So I'm just going to give us a moment to take a deep breath. And now in the next few seconds, try to say no loudly and assertively wherever you are, if you can. If you can't, that's cool too. Like if you're in class or something, that would be really awkward. Okay, go for it.
Doing?
No. No. She was not listening, but. Oh, okay. She's doing her work. Well, so you get the point. People feel uncomfortable, but it's good. It's going to get more uncomfortable. And then the other just basic fundamental tool of bystander intervention is don't do stuff alone. If you're with friends, make sure they notice what's going on before you like intervene in some way, so they can have your back. If you're alone, chances are there's other people around, and chances are other people notice what's going on. They're just pretending they don't, or they're looking around for another person who might do something. So try to make eye contact with somebody, or just find some way to make sure that you're not going to be now the only person sort of facing whatever is going on. And if you are alone, sort of calling a friend or texting a friend what's going on can also just be a really important sort of safety cue. So then the next sort of activity that we do is this this like little voice training thing. And again, we're just trying to practice the skills of building confidence. We're not saying that you always like yell no, and that will be how you intervene in every situation. That's absurd, and it's not what we're saying. But we do want to get people loosened up a little. So in the activity, we have people sort of get up and move around, and similar to the last training, make sure there's space for people in wheelchairs who may be present to physically move around as well. Or people can participate however they feel most comfortable. But the goal is just to be mingling. And then the facilitator is going to tap someone's shoulder, and then that person now needs to get everybody's attention. Before you get started, you're going to have everybody think about a moment they want to get others' attention. So perhaps it's, you just dropped $10, or there's a fire over here, or I can't find my keys, or I don't think that's how you should talk to somebody, whatever it's going to be. And then when you tap them on the shoulder during this activity, they need to sort of draw everyone's attention however they imagine doing that. So again, perhaps it's loudly saying a statement, or taking a step back as they do it, or towards it, and then you're going to see how well they were able to do that. I don't feel like I'm describing this very well, but if you're reading the activity, hopefully it makes sense. And then you debrief it. Did you manage to attract attention? If yes, why? If not, why not? Sometimes people really don't like speaking up. So you might have tapped someone's shoulder who this isn't the activity for them, but it's still good to just sort of talk through. There's ways with our body language to attract attention as well. And there's ways to maybe not do this with verbal cues, because that could alert people in a way you don't want to alert people to a situation. It's still just practice. It's practicing sort of stopping what's going on and getting other people to pay attention. This also is an optional exercise. Oftentimes people don't actually have a full 2.5 hours for the training. And so I'd say this is one of the ones to maybe let go of first. It's kind of just like a warm up on the way towards the rest of the workshop. So from there, we jump into the do's and don'ts handout that we developed, again, as People's Response Team and AFSC Chicago. This resource on the AFSC website actually went super viral. It was downloaded like more than 10,000 times and crashed our website for a while, which was very exciting. It's linked here. It's at the end of the training packet, and I'm also going to go ahead and I'm going to pull it up on my screen so that you see it. Do you see it? Just want to make sure I get it right. Cool technology. So when we do this one, basically we have folks read each little mini paragraph. So like someone would read what this handout is, and then a new volunteer would read a do. The next new volunteer would read the next one, and the next one, etc. And then as you get to the end, you sort of ask if there's any questions. Take some time to respond to those questions. And again, this is a basic sort of introductory resource that we developed because we wanted to get something out there. And we wanted to push back against a real trend in bystander intervention resources. Sorry. The majority of what exists, if you Google bystander intervention, there's tons of resources already out there. So we really didn't want to recreate the wheel, but we did want to create something that doesn't tell people as the first step to call the police. We actually go ahead and put don't call the police because we think that that can often invite more danger into the situation, potentially escalate it. You don't know what either person involved in this sort of what their lived experiences are. You don't know about their documentation status, their history with police, their mental health history, whether they need to get home to children. So many different things that could be at risk if the police were to show up to a scene, but also we don't know who's around us. Perhaps there's someone in the near vicinity for whom they're going to be at great risk if the police come. But we also understand that we live in a really broken world and have really limited resources. And so the idea that we never are going to call 911 in an emergency situation is probably a little absurd. What we do want to say is that you should have someone's consent, if possible, before you call. Like, I've been asked to call 911 before, and so I've called it. I'm not going to sit here and go, well, actually, I saw on this handout that I shouldn't call the police, so I'll never do it, right? Like, if someone is bleeding or, you know, a life is at risk and it seems really important in that moment, trust your judgment, and again, trust the person who's being sort of harassed or attacked and follow cue. But we just want to push back on this idea that it's the first thing that people should do, because that is what most resources say. And we really want to push back against that. We think you should sort of make your presence known by making eye contact, getting closer to something. If you're going to film an incident, be sure not to put that on social media, especially without someone's consent. You could have just found charges for either person. We never know how law enforcement or a state's attorney or a district attorney is gonna use possible footage. So really be careful about filming, and if you film, be very hesitant to put it online without, again, checking in with whoever was just harmed. Take cues from the person being harassed. Notice if they're resisting in their own way and honor that. We put this in here as well. Around just sort of like, don't tone the police. No, don't police the tone. of whoever is experiencing this attack or harassment. Because I think, again, sometimes we think of de-escalation, we think of conflict resolution, especially sort of the way I was socialized as a really, as a middle-class white person growing up. The idea that if someone's yelling back at their attacker, then we need everyone to just calm down, right? That kind of is a little bit insulting and implies that someone experiencing an attack doesn't have a right to resist in the way that makes sense for them. And we want to honor people's autonomy, and just make sure that whoever's experiencing an attack knows they have support. They know that you have your back. If something resolves itself, then you walk up at the end of something, check in with the person who's just harassed and see if they need anything. That could be as important, if not more important, than like jumping in to try to save the day when nobody needed you to do that. So that's what I'm going to talk about for that handout. And then you jump into the bulk of the training, and you really want to make sure you have a solid chunk of time for this. There's 30 minutes at first, and then another 15 minutes later. If you have a smaller group and it's people who mostly know each other and you have more time, we really recommend doing scenarios. People always learn through role plays. If you have a bigger group and they don't know each other and you don't have as much time, role plays eat up time and they take some trust. So we recommend doing things as small group discussions. So here we have laid out sort of how suggestions of how to structure the role plays, sort of little notes about how there's notes for debriefing them on here. And then again, as you go along, that poster that you started with that says strategies is where you're going to chart strategies for bystander intervention as people are going along. You can, I think it's great to chart what people actually say. So if someone says, I think a good strategy is, or I've learned from my own experience that it's a good strategy to just ask someone if they need support. Right, ask if they need support. But also at the end of each scenario, if you use the scenarios we've offered, you'll notice that we have little notes for debrief. So, for example, in the first scenario that we offer, we talk about like the idea of like verbal harassment happening on the train. And if this hasn't escalated yet and it's not clear it's going to escalate, a great strategy is to de-escalate, perhaps even act like you know the person. So if this didn't come out in the group's debrief on their own, you would share this strategy and write de-escalate up on the board. I hope that that's clear. Similarly, in the second scenario, if you notice someone sort of asserting themselves already and you want to sort of jump in and be assertive as well, be direct, we want to make sure that gets in here. These also are, I need water. I'm freaking out. Sorry. Thank you. I thought I would be fine because I talk all the time. I love hearing myself talk, but this is painful. If anyone's done bystander intervention sort of trainings before, a lot of people are familiar with the idea of like the 3Ds or the 4Ds. And so that's what we're trying to speak to in these debriefs. So de-escalate, be direct, distraction is a great strategy. And that's especially helpful if it's like two people who appear to know each other. It could potentially be like a situation of like domestic violence. After you talk through or role play a couple scenarios, definitely take a break. This is a lot. People need a chance to feel like people. And then if you have extra time, it's great to just do a midpoint check-in. What are we learning so far? What's coming up and what's missing? Because that'll give you a chance to really make sure that the last sort of chunk of time that you have is going to speak to people's continued questions. So the last two scenarios we include are sort of the idea of sort of an attack that is getting physical. We kind of wrote it as a situation that's not as violent. Like it's physical, but it's, people have potentially been drinking and it's like pretty clear that you can just get more people involved and delegate people different roles, some people to support whoever's being harassed, some people to really try to distract the aggressors. but some people really might want to just say, you know what, let's say this is something more violent. Let's say this is someone sort of attacking someone with a weapon, or let's say this is someone actually, you know, about to beat someone up, or something else that you've seen, right? Again, we don't have to have all the answers. We have to be willing to hold space, and hold space that's difficult because people are going to disagree about what's a good strategy. We've done this training, and sometimes people just nod their heads the whole time and they love everything we say. And then we've done this training and people do not like what we are saying because that's not how they would do it. And that's okay. We're not here to like convince everyone to do it our way. We're here to intervene on this sort of trend of people calling the police all the time. That really is a big reason why we made this way. And also to offer people a chance to practice, right? We're all different and have different limits, and that's okay. And then the last situation we always do try to include in here is sort of a discussion of how bystander intervention is different when it involves the police. And so we include a scenario that involves the police. Often this is our first interaction with a group as well, or an organization if they bring us in to do a training. So this plants a nice seed for us to come back and do the full Copwatch workshop. And again, you'll notice some more specific to Chicago links in here, but when you're debriefing it. But we like these scenarios because they speak to a pretty good variety. But another way to do this whole section is actually just have the group brainstorm some different scenarios that they want to talk through and then go through those scenarios. So it could be much more specific to people's lived experiences. That is fine. We've picked these ones because they allow us to get the information we want to get across in sort of a creative and organized way. So once you've sort of wrapped up the scenarios, you'll try to answer any burning questions, just like we're going to do in a moment. And obviously, people are going to feel unresolved. Like this is a life skill that we're talking about building, and you're not going to build it in one day. We'd like to distribute feedback forms. They look pretty similar to the Copwatch feedback forms. Those questions are right there in the handout. And then, just to be cheesy, we kind of all say no together again at the end. Some people are like, that's too negative. So you could figure out something else you want to do as a closing. Maybe the one word as you're leaving. How do you feel? Whatever makes sense. And then here are the resources. The practical web tutorial to bystander intervention and de-escalation tactics. The first half of that was the resource I was talking about earlier that's really helpful. And then this video, Don't Be a Bystander, was a video I was able to support a friend in creating, Lewis Wallace, who was sort of motivated to do it by a mentor of many of ours, Miriam Kaba. And it goes over a lot of these same tips. And so it can be great to show that at the end as well, because it also closes the video by reminding people of how important it is to actually organize for like systemic change and to sort of dismantle white supremacy altogether. So we've used that in trainings before, but we didn't write it into the curriculum just because it's optional. But that is what I have. And then at the very back is one version of the bystander intervention handout, because that's the only thing we really need to copy and distribute at it. But that's what I got. Whew, 8:20 on the dot. Sorry that I had trouble talking. I've never done this before.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Debbie, for just going in on that. Can you mute yourself? I hate hearing the echo. Yeah, and so thank you so much for everyone that's been hanging in. We got 10 more minutes to sort of go through some Q&A. I got some questions piled up already. One is from Palika, and actually, while Debbie was presenting, I was looking at who's actually on the call in the like conversation piece. And Palika, you're part of Witness, and I'm a big fan of Witness, and I would love to meet up with you because it says you're currently in Chicago, so let's definitely make that happen. And Ellen, I definitely want to follow up with you too about just the ICE and the Migra Watch piece, because I do think that's a really important piece to combine with this Copwatch training. So I'm definitely going to be following up with you after this. But Palika's first question for Debbie is, do you have any literature about using the term interpersonal violence instead of hate crime that you could possibly share? And yeah, so I'm going to pass that back over to Debbie.
Yeah, totally. So I could share resources about sort of the limits and sort of dangers of hate crime legislation for sure. But I think the idea of like not calling something a hate crime isn't something I've seen like written about as much. If other people know other things, that's great. And I'm just using interpersonal violence because it's sort of more of a general term that I'm more comfortable with. So I don't have literature on that like particular word switch, but I do have I'm so mixed up. I do have resources on the limits of hate crimes legislation and sort of the dangers of that frame that I'd be happy to share. I'm going to poke around on the internet for them or include that in a follow-up email. I'll actually do that one because I can't do two things at once.
And also, Palika had another question, but my computer timed out, and then it deleted all of the questions, and so I cannot see the questions anymore. But Palika actually had a follow-up question in the Q&A box that I could no longer see. So maybe, Palika, if you want to recopy and paste that for us, that would be awesome. I believe it was... Oh, there it is. What are tips for de-escalation that don't make people feel like you are minimizing their feelings / the pain that they may have caused? That's the next question from Palika. It's in the Q&A box. So there's two more questions from Palika, and the first one, if you're not seeing, are you seeing it yet? So if you're not seeing it, just listen to me. It's what are tips for de-escalation that don't make people feel like you are minimizing their feelings or the pain the pain they have been caused?
I'm having a little trouble understanding the question.
Okay.
Just because I haven't seen it, but I can talk generally about de-escalation tips if that's helpful. Were you gonna say something?
Yeah, I was just going to maybe try to, and maybe Palika, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what Palika is asking is like, how are you de-escalating the situation without making the person being harassed to make it feel like it's not a big deal? Like, how, if you're trying to like calm the other person down or trying to intervene and be like, hey, what's going on? Like, how can you do that without making it feel without making them feel like, oh, it's not a big deal. Why am I getting upset? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, absolutely. So I think, again, a lot more of the details of bystander intervention and how to do it are in the training in those notes for debrief that I didn't really have time to get into because this wasn't a presentation about those strategies. But I think one is just we sort of encourage people to make sure they're making eye contact with or making their presence known to the person experiencing harassment as a priority over jumping in and starting to argue with someone else. Now, so that could mean sort of just walking up to someone and saying, hey, do you want to go sit on the other side of the train with me? If something hasn't escalated yet. If it has escalated and it feels really important to intervene in some way, I think it's really important not to sort of excuse someone's verbal violence, right? But like you've said, also we're trying to de-escalate. So one sort of direct strategy is to say something like, hey, this feels like really wrong. Can we talk about something else? Or, hey, this is making me feel uncomfortable. Can this stop or something like that? Really not trying to use you words that towards the sort of attacker in the situation that make them feel like they've been attacked, but still pointing out that this is wrong, right? We don't want to just imply that everything is fine and that all that needs to happen is people calm down. And I think also just showing someone that you're present and sort of available to support them if they want it, shows people you think it isn't okay. Like I've been on a bus with somebody and they were sort of being verbally sort of attacked by another passenger, and I made eye contact with them and eventually had a chance to say, hey, do you want to switch seats so that they could be further away? And they said, no, we're fine, because they were almost home and that's how they wanted to deal with it. So people actually don't always want someone to intervene, because what that can do is it can escalate a situation, right? And to intervene in the typical sense we think of it as jumping into the middle of something and saying, hey, stop, right? But there's lots of other ways to offer and show support, and that's what we're trying to encourage. people to think through together what are those strategies. So I think that's a really good question. And honestly, it's a question you should probably bring up in your training and have participants try to answer it, because people are real clever and have really good ways of giving each other feedback.
Awesome. That's a great question and a great answer. Another question from Palika is it part of our duty to hold the person committing the interpersonal violence accountable somehow? And what does that look like? Obviously excluding the legal action piece. It's not in that one? Okay. So I guess what Palika's asking, and I think I could answer a little bit, is like, I don't think that it is our duty to hold that person that's committing the interpersonal violence accountable somehow. I think this relates to that cop watching piece again. It's like, I think it's our duty to make sure that the person that's being affected is safe and gets out of that situation. And that's our main priority. Because we are only one person, we can't really, have all of these arms to hold that person accountable and make sure that person's safe. And, we're only one person. And so I think what's coming out of these trainings as very basic 101 sort of trainings is that we're just trying to keep people safe, and we're just trying to move people away from danger. And that's our number one priority. And so that's how I would answer that question.
Cool. And hearing her answer it, I understood it better. We also mentioned at the beginning there's what the training is for and what it isn't for. I didn't say all of them because we were just giving the overview, but we talk about how this isn't a situation for resolving conflicts within a community. I think that's often where we hear the word sort of accountability, right? Is okay, there's just been harm between two people who know each other and who are going to have to see each other again. How do we make sure it's resolved? And that's more talking about restorative and transformative justice or community accountability. And a lot of those resources exist and they're awesome. And we'd be happy to share some of those as well. But that's not what we're talking about in bystander intervention. Again, the goals we're trying to do are reduce harm in the moment and try to make whatever thing is happening stop, and to make sure the person experiencing the harm knows they have support if they want it. And so if we keep those two things in mind, it's frustrating and it's limited. It's not as much about how am I going to go make sure you never do this again, but hopefully the fact that someone is intervening and it's not as easy for them to sort of just say awful things or threaten someone, that there are other ways to hold people accountable. And again, I think if it's happening in a community where everybody knows who the attacker was, it is important to start up some kind of restorative justice circle around it, or to think about long-term accountability with what that would look like. But we really tried to focus on scenarios involving strangers.
Great, thank you, Debbie. And I think we're about at time right now, and I do know that one of LT's questions was unanswered, but LT is actually one of our really great friends, and I think Debbie is actually still going to respond, but we can go into conversation later. And LT also made comments in the conversation box about the video that Debbie had mentioned. So if you wanna read that, I think I might read it out loud just because there are a lot of people on the phone. But LT had said about and which video were you actually talking about in that moment? I forget the video. The bystander intervention video that Debbie was referring to earlier. LT said it's such a great video. This is a random comment, but I think in my own, it went away. Okay, there. In my own fidelity to the principle of not calling the cops, I've made a mistake when I should have called the cops in a medical emergency. So just a side note, if you're concerned someone has overdosed or it's more a question of biomedical things, sometimes you do need to call 911. And they also said, I have heard in Philly, not sure if it's relevant to other places, that if you say overdose, you often get cops first. But if you just describe symptoms on a 911 call, it's often more likely you'll just get an ambulance. And so again, that video is the one Debbie had helped Lewis Wallace with.
And you also, on the tip of 911, you can also attempt to ask for fire instead of police. It doesn't always work, but that's a really important piece, LT, and we're glad that you mentioned it, around the reality that 911 is a resource that does things that we can't do without them, mainly bringing ambulances to the scene. But yeah, that we are at time.
Yeah, I want to thank everybody so much for being on this call and for just taking that extra step to want to do this training in your city, town, or in Chicago if you're here. We definitely want to welcome feedback. So please email us at peoplesresponseteam@gmail.com. If you do the training and then you have some feedback, please let us know. Please stay in touch with us to even let us know that you did this training and how many people came. And, we just want to make sure that we're staying on top of where these trainings are happening. And we really appreciate you all. Thank you so much. I think we might have like an email sheet of all the people that were on this call, so we'll definitely be following up with resources for questions that sort of got answered and sort of didn't. And so, yeah, thank you so much. We appreciate you, and have a great night.